Roll call, please.
Stein. Present. Stonebarger.
Present.
Arnold, absent. Shriver. Rhonda Johnson.
Here.
McGuire. Here. Dolly. Here. Dan Albertson. Bill Johnson is absent. You're there, you gotta sign.
Thank you.
You're accounted for.
The first item on the agenda is the approval of the March 19th, 2015 minutes. I'll need a motion in a second.
I'll
Motion-
second.
Motion by Mr. McGuire, second by Mr. Stonebarger. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, motion carries. Second item on the agenda, Josh Susi, appeals for requirements of zoning ordinance sections 21-0302 for a property in a non-conforming garage at 2001 East Kemp.
Again, yep, as stated, this is application for permit number 15997. Application was submitted requesting to construct a non-conforming 660 square foot, 22 by 30 garage. Said structure proposed to be constructed 1.5 feet from the west property line, where a minimum of 25 is required, and 1.5 feet from the side east property line, where 6 foot is required. I guess the history of this thing says the house was built clear back in 1895, so I guess that tells us why it's where it is on the lot. Currently, this substandard platted lot located in the R2A single-family attached residential district consists of a non-conforming primary structure and a non-compliant lawn shed. There's no legal buildable area on this parcel. The boulevard public right-of-way is being used to satisfy the entire west required front yard setbacks for the existing single-family dwelling and proposed garage. Additionally, a 1.5 setback is proposed, where a minimum 20 is standard parking length needed for the front garage doors so as to avoid encroaching over into the public right-of-ways. If this is approved, we'd recommend a waiver of right to protest for curb, gutter, street, all standard street improvements. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. With that, I'll open the public hearing if anyone's here to speak on behalf or against the variance.
Oh, I should say that public notice requirements are meant. We did get McElhaney opposed this. He is one of the adjacent landowners to the. I'm going to back this out a little bit and shut that off. He was up here. Of course, he was granted his variance back in the day too. And then we had another party that doesn't support but didn't want to be publicly opposed. And is Sarah here? No, she apparently not. Engineering recommends eliminating the existing illegal parking pad and will allow a maximum overall 36-foot driveway. Those are the additional comments I had. Sorry.
About the driveway?
Our engineering staff has recommended, and let me blow this up. Right here, there's a parking pad right now, apparently, a concrete pad where this car is sitting. If the garage is allowed to be here, they'll be allowed to have up to a 36-foot concrete driveway. And then this one should be removed, is what they're requesting for your consideration.
What was the reason for opposition, Ken? What were their reasonings?
Sarah just walked in. I'll let you.
Go back to the reason that you had 2 or 3 people that opposed it. Did they give you a reasoning as to why they opposed it?
I think that, I'm back away here for just a second. They just think it's too tight on too much of a lot, but you know, in the truest sense of having to have a hardship, this lot does have a hardship. I mean, at some time, somebody allowed this non-conforming house to be built on this lot without a garage. Now we're pushing that everything has to be put someplace on the property, and he's merely but trying to get a garage to get the stuff off the property.
How wide's the right-of-way in that street?
It's an 80-foot,
So it's an 80-foot street. Today, if it was built, we'd recommend probably 66 feet.
60 or 66.
Even 60, that would allow 10 feet.
Yeah.
That'd allow that to be a 35-foot
And
lot.
And this one, you know, this guy is there, this guy is there. McElhaney built and he was granted variance. But at the time there was a ratty house there and we improved it by putting something nicer and better there. You know, this guy is there.
On the McElhaney house, how close is his garage to the lot line?
Oh, I think he is about, where's my stone? Where's my ruler? This is? Let's see, he's probably about 15 feet.
It does appear that McElhaney had to put his sidewalk in at that time, though.
Yes, and there's actually curb and gutter on that side of the street too.
that half street there or full street? Or just gravel?
He actually wanted it paved, but he couldn't get consensus, so, I mean, you gotta get. well,
50%,
that's how it works.
51%? At 12th Street, is it gravel?
Yes.
Okay.
So Ken, the house directly across the street, how close is that garage from the right-of-way?
Appears to be rather close. If the lines are correct, it appears to be about 1.8 feet.
What was the answer to Pat's question as far as what the objections were based upon?
They just, it's too big for the lot. Doesn't support, but doesn't want to be publicly opposed. That's all they gave for reasons.
You mentioned the parking cement pad. Actually, isn't, if you zoom in on that, Ken, please, isn't there also the deck? I mean, isn't that also on
Well,
the?
this is where actually the new garage is proposed to go, so this will all come out anyway, or be utilized as the garage floor if it meets the same elevation requirements or whatever.
So the
else.
cement pad outside of the property line would be removed?
I believe, Sarah, this part here, if granted, will be incorporated into the new garage driveway area. All this will, all this entirety here. And then, Sarah, you want to speak on this, since I think it was from you?
Generally, we would allow up to 36 feet maximum of a driveway for any individual residence, and not as many driveways as they want, each one having a maximum of 36 feet, but a maximum of 36 feet. And so you could put it right where that car is parked and extend it out for a total of 36 feet. That's not going to be where he wants it. He's going to want it in front of his garage. And so to have a total of 36 feet, he could have whatever that width is subtracted from the 36 feet in front of his garage, or he could have 36 feet in front of his garage and take that out, or whatever combination he wants, as long as the maximum.
So if approved, the best thing to say is just a maximum garage width of not more than 36
We just try to limit those garage widths to 36 feet. We don't want people paving their entire
Right,
lot,
and in this
basically.
case, it's impossible for him with a driveway accessing off 12th to park anywhere but in the right-of-way, where, you know, if you put the driveway off of the alley, he could park entirely on his own property, but then the garage is going to be too far away from the house. I mean, he wants it close to the house, I'm sure, to be
And-
practical.
Trust me, anybody that rents the place isn't gonna park.
Yeah, they don't
there.
wanna
They're
walk.
gonna just pull up in their boulevard anyway, so.
Yeah.
Is the applicant here?
Yes, Mr. Susi is here.
He can come on up. I'm sure we're gonna have some questions.
State your name, please.
I'm Josh Susi.
Any questions for Mr. Susi? John? Rhonda? What?
Okay, Mr. Susi, I have a question. So what Sarah was saying, the 36 feet of driveway, is that an issue? You remove the part in front of the house and move it over in front of the
Yeah, no,
proposed?
that's not an issue at all. I was planning on removing that and just having the plain driveway in front of the garage. That pad only goes out actually, the width of that car length is actually gravel the last 7-8 feet to the road anyway, so it doesn't serve any purpose.
How many bedrooms is that house?
It is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath.
You're currently renting it out, is that what it is?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
The tough issue with this one, Josh, is that 1.5 foot setback. We're in an R2A zone. Our normal zones have a 9-foot setback on each side. Again, this is a small lot. We've made accommodations for that part of town in our R2A zone, which allows a 6-foot setback on each side. The reason we have those setbacks is just to keep things apart. where I struggle with this one is with a 1.5 foot setback, is that to the sidewall or to the eave?
That's actually the footprint.
And, you know, so I look at that and go, the thing that I struggle with is from a neighborhood standpoint where your eave is gonna hang over or on the lot line, so when the rain comes, and it's not the average drizzle, it's the inch per hour rain that flies off the roof and lands on the neighbor's house, or the snow that accumulates in the neighbor's yard, that if we had adequate setbacks, some of that would be encompassed on yours, but I really struggle with a 1.5 foot setback. I realize even if we said, you know, sometimes we'll bend to 4 feet, but still, if we took, you got 3 feet of setbacks, if we went to 8, that's another 5 feet, that leaves your garage at 17 feet wide, and I know what you're probably trying to do is 22 feet is barely enough
Correct.
to park a car in. When I looked at it, I went, you know, to me, the only viable alternative is to come in from the alley and put the garage on the back side of it. And yes, it is further from the house unless you have a longer driveway, but boy, to me, that's awful close to the lot line.
But even at that, following the 12 foot off, you're gonna only have a single stall, 13-foot wide garage.
You know, when I looked at it, I went, there's a monster right away on one side. I'm not so hung up on pushing the building to the roadside lot line. It's the other lot line that I'm mostly concerned with.
I would actually prefer that you did push it all to the roadside, put a 0 property line to the west.
Right.
And put all 3 feet to the east.
You know, I wish there was just another 6 feet on that lot, which you can't without vacating some of that road. But I struggle putting stuff too close to the lot line just because of the neighborhood. Once it's there, we can never get rid of it.
So Ken, what was the right-of-way on this 12th Street?
80 feet.
80 feet, and we could probably get by with a 60-foot?
Sarah, what would you recommend there for a street right-of-way width? 60, 66, which one?
Yeah, 60 or 60. That's the question, 60 or 66.
Yeah.
And, you know, if the sidewalk goes in the future, that completely eliminates being able to park on that driveway.
Speaking of the sidewalk, where would the sidewalk go?
The
It's,
sidewalk goes,
we would put a road in there. Let's say they finish the road. We'd put a 38-foot street in there.
well, and that's, we don't,
Well, let's see what the curb to curb is that's existing right now.
we probably match what they have down the road.
Mm-hmm. It's paved up there?
38 feet.
It's not paved, it's gravel, but there is a curb and gutter to the alley on the north side.
And we normally have how wide of a boulevard normally?
It's, whether it's
Yeah,
it's
it
about 13
depends.
feet, yeah.
But anywhere in there, it's gonna cut the driveway in half. And the sidewalk goes in the right-of-way adjacent to the property line, within a foot of the property line. So depending on whether we decided 60 feet was sufficient there, or 66 feet, it would be somewhere in there.
Twelfth goes through to the south. Is that the south to the bottom of the screen there?
Yes,
So it go, and it's also gravel there?
yep.
And that's a road? Right down
This one
there?
here? Oh, that one is paved? Okay,
It's
Yeah.
just that one block stretch.
so, okay.
How wide's the right of way to the south?
Is there curb
And
and
that's
gutter?
paved there.
Oh, there's no curb and gutter, it's paved, yeah.
We have a rural road there.
Let's see here. Well, it looks like, our best guess here is that it's gonna be about 39 feet, 38 feet too. I think, Sarah. That's probably a 38-foot wide road to the south too. Yeah.
Same right of way?
Oh, same right.
Same 80-foot right of way?
Yep.
It is, okay. Sarah, in a case like that, when you look in that part of town and go, we carry an 80-foot right-of-way there. In today's standards, we're evaluating this structure with a garage based on today's standards. But the road right-of-way is much larger than what today's standards are. Why wouldn't we vacate that right-of-way on streets like that, that we know that we're never going to need 80 feet of right-of-way? Is there utilities and things like that in there
There
that
might
prevent
be.
us from doing that?
It's possible. We would have to investigate that. But, I mean, the wider right-of-ways aren't just for necessarily wider pavement. It allows for a broad boulevard and, you know, big trees and things. That's what they envisioned when they platted it, but we've gone back and forth. It does look to me like the sidewalks up farther to the north, you can measure. Maybe they were thinking it might be vacated there. You don't want the sidewalks to be, you know, you like to vacate consistently in an entire block, and there's already sidewalks. We're gonna put those in,
Those sidewalks look like they're set at the 66 foot.
yeah, so they were probably figuring 66 feet. So I would say this should be 66 feet, because we wouldn't want those sidewalks in private property.
I mean, to fix it and to make it better would be to pursue a vacation in there to see if it's a feasible alternative. You know, from our standpoint, that's an old part of town. We're not gonna put a collector street down there. It's not being used, it's not even paved. If a person would foresee a vacation, you'd have to go all the way up to First Avenue and then you probably down south too, to make it consistent. And then you'd go a 66-foot right-of-way, which gives you said 80 foot, right? 14 feet of vacation, 7 feet on each side of the road. That makes his lot 32 feet wide instead of 25 feet wide. Is it out of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but is it out of character to say, you know, maybe we should take a look at that before we approve a 1.5 foot variance? Would it make more sense to take a look at if there's a possibility of a vacation and at least turn over that rock first?
On Office Street? I'm sorry.
Can we table this until we look at the other?
You know, that's what I'm asking, is the procedural side of it. And it's just me speaking out loud. I think John probably agrees with me that I'm a lot more interested in giving less variance on a bigger lot than more variance on a smaller lot. Can we explore that? Luke?
Luke Muller, First District, you'd have a couple options there, and one option is you could figure out today what that setback would be that you'd be satisfied with on both the east and west side, and grant the variance for that size, knowing that the individual or the right-of-way is gonna have to be vacated to get to that point. That would be item one, so that the variance is in place at the time when the vacation is done. Or you could just sit back, table it until a vacation is taken care of. Those are probably the two.
What's the
simplest
procedure to explore a vacation of some of the right-of-way on that block? I mean, what do you guys think? That makes more sense than,
How do we go through the vacation? Do we have to have, 100% sign off of everybody adjacent there to get it done?
and everybody there gains 7 feet of property.
Yeah, but that, trust me, we thought that was a good thing down south, and they said, no way, we don't want 7 more feet of taxes, so. I'm just trying to find out the contingent, so if the vacation go through, great, but if it doesn't, then what?
Then they have to come back.
Better off tabling it until we see if
Yeah,
I think you're better off the table.
table it and then and have the applicant pursue a vacation with the engineering department. You know, I mean, there's like Sarah said, there's more things in a vacation as to what is in that right away, and we can't tell right off
But I do think
hand.
the vacation should be limited to that one block. You
Correct.
start going another block south, and then you're trying to get out of it.
You know, and I think
You
straight
really
faced,
stretch it
every
out.
block has different characteristics as to how close it is to collector and streets and parks, things like that. But we do preliminary plans more and more, and we don't see the 80-foot right-of-ways needed unless it's on a major collector. You can come on, state your name and,
I want you to just get up here, the other chair. No, I want, you come close, no, pick your point zone,
Jason Shepard. I own the house 1205 East Kemp,
which is.
right next door. Now, if you guys
This
vacated,
way?
yep, right to the east. If you guys have vacated to give him more property, is the setback gonna be appropriate then, off mine?
More
no,
than-
no, what we're saying is if we vacated that property on the opposite side of his lot, once his lot goes from 25 feet to 32 feet, then we'll reassess it and go, you know what? Now that you got a 32-foot lot, we take another look at it.
5 or 6 feet. on
Yeah, that
the
would
side.
give us more room to move the building further over in a way. What our goal is to keep that building as far away from your property line as we can. Just because you're the one, and I've been on both sides of it. I've signed for variances, and you think, you know, they're my neighbors. Everything's. I want to be a good neighbor, but once that building's up, there's things that can happen that no one thought of before, like where does the snow land and where does the water land, and you know, I think in '97 when we had all that snow, everything was fine until it started to melt and there was ice heaves everywhere, and the water inadvertently went in most people's basement windows. So that's what our goal is to vacate some land possibly on the other side that would allow that building to sit somewhere else than what was presented to us today.
Anybody else?
So in a case like that, what I'd ask for a motion and a second to table this so the applicant can take a look at the opportunity of a vacation before we
Yeah, I'll make a
proceed.
motion to table this.
Stanton wanted to say something first,
Just,
I think.
just procedurally, if hypothetically he does have to come back before the board, since he did all the notice of public hearing and stuff, if he has to come back before the board for further discussion about possible variance relief, can you waive the fees to the
Yeah,
applicant?
customarily we waive the fees, and when he comes back, we're just taking it off the table. Correct, we're not actually reapplying or not?
Because the I presume the notice of public hearing was specific as to what was being asked for. My guess is it's probably gonna be a revised request, so if
We
the,
generally do that at the meeting all the time.
I know,
Oh.
yeah, but we'll see what, we'll see
Yeah,
what.
we'll just
see
say
what
if in
happens.
fact he has to reapply, we would recommend he waive the fee in the
Okay.
motion. So what I'd ask for is a motion and a second to table.
Make a motion to table this.
Motion by Mr. Dolly,
I'll second it.
second by Mr. Stoneberg. Any other further discussion? Any questions from the applicant? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have one item in old business. Ken, you can help me lead through this. This has to do with the Beacon Center on Jensen Avenue, if you bring it up. A discussion came in regard to that is they've continued to fulfill their building permit and put the business there. We talked about it a little bit at the last meeting in the landscaping on Jensen Avenue with that project not going through. Ken and I were approached by a couple of people, and what their concerns were is they wanted to know what our procedure was, is to, if a person came in for a property and needed a building permit, would we make them abide by the landscape ordinance as it's in place today? And Ken had said, no, that we normally wouldn't require that as long as the footprint of the building stayed the same. In this particular case, it was a little convoluted because it came to us twice with a couple of different options, or gave us a couple different visions of what they do. When it came to us, they included landscaping on Jensen and on, what's that other street, 8th there?
8th, yep.
Jensen and 8th. And I think they thought, there was a miscommunication. They thought they were required to put the landscaping in. It came in on their plan, so we just approved their plan as it was and said, nice, they want to put their landscaping in. They've come back now and said, we had no idea how expensive that landscaping really was, and would you reconsider not making us put the landscaping in like you would with any other permit that came in? Am I close?
Yep.
So you can take it from there.
Well, that's about it. It's basically is they've come back, and had this come to me just as an interior remodel, there would have been no requirements, as we discussed a week or two ago, for any kind of landscape requirements to be included. So we're looking for a reconsideration and to take that off the table.
First off, I want to comment that I was one of the negative votes on placing the Beacon Center where it's at. I didn't think it was right that it should be in a commercial area when they had women and children. And also commented at the time, there's no sidewalks there, and there's no way for, they says, oh, the kids can go to the zoo, or they can go to the park and all this, and they'd have to cross 212, and there's no sidewalks along Jensen Avenue. And so, at that time, when they had the drawings there with the curb and gutter and the boulevard and sidewalks, that's the way they sold it to us. They said, we want to be a, good steward of the community, we want to have a nice facility, we want to make it look really nice, and we want to have a nice atmosphere for the children. And so they says, we're going to have this curb and gutter, we're going to have the green area, and it's going to look nice. And now they're coming back and say, well, we don't want to abide by what we agreed to. And so I would be against granting them that.
Well, the other thing too is to meet the perfect compliance to the law, letter of the law, they're gonna lose about 17 of their parking spaces on that side road too, I believe. I'm just trying to quote, not a memory from the conversation I had here.
But they also purchased parking across the street to make sure they had enough
They have
parking.
that parking across the street as theirs also, yes. Currently, I believe though, what they have at the building right now has been satisfying all their needs, so.
Can you pan out a little bit?
Well, this is,
What I want to, the radio station's not in there, is it?
I can, if I go to the other picture, it'll probably be in there.
Kind of one of the questions we have from our decision is, when somebody comes in with a bare piece of ground, they have to uphold to all the landscaping ordinances, and what we end up with are older places that don't meet the code right next to a brand new place that does meet the code, so it's kind of hopscotched or checkerboarded, patchworked through there. The one thought when John and I were talking earlier is, at a minimum, we should, and Luke, you can tell me, Sarah, you can tell me if you think it's fair, at a minimum, we should get a waiver right to protest on some of that, because sooner or later, as a place is redeveloped, you're going to have some that have all the landscaping and some that don't. And is it fair that just because it's an older building that it never meets the current code? Sooner or later, we have to kind of blend them all in and together. And that was my thought as I look and go, to me, we normally wouldn't have required them if it was an insurance office or a real estate office or an engineering office. They would have come in, got their building permit, and been fine. In this case, because it's needed a conditional use for counseling, they got slapped with $50,000 worth of landscaping. And like John says, and I agree with John, part of their condition was, we want to conform to the neighborhood, we want to show that we're going to be good neighbors, but in the end, it's a little more expensive than they thought. So now it's put back before us to reconsider a change in their landscaping ordinance. What do the rest of you think?
I wasn't on the board when that happened, but I guess I'd have to fully agree with John. If that's how they presented their case, then, and that's how the votes went across because of that.
I guess from my standpoint, that landscaping wasn't a deciding factor in my support of it going where it's at. And I wouldn't be opposed to doing a waiver of right to protest until the rest of that block, Jensen Avenue does get completed with those infrastructure improvements. When we discussed it at the time, it was looking at Jensen's probably going to be redone shortly in the future here. And if that's not the case anymore, then.
I think it's
So-
gotten pushed back a couple more years. It's not even on the agenda right now.
So if they redo Jensen Avenue and have a waiver right to protest, does that also mean they're going to do it install it on 8th at the same time they do it on Jensen Avenue?
It'd probably be in two parts. The waiver can be on two sides, two waivers, basically. I mean, the assumption would be if when Jensen gets redone and sidewalks and curb and gutter go in, they have no choice to put it in there. When 8th Street is developed to a point that the city feels it's in the best interest of the city and the neighborhood, then the city can pull the trigger on the waiver. And I mean, you look on the other side of the street, it does look like there is, the real estate offices to the north there, right? Is that's curb gutter lands? The other side of the street is compliant to the landscaping mostly, and where the greenhouse is, there's some green there. I see that's for sale. I assume if somebody buys that, they'll have to, and redevelop it, they'll have to uphold the landscaping ordinance.
Likewise, I was not on the board at the time that decision was made. But again, if I'm trying to if I'm understanding correctly, Ken, you're saying that the variance was granted, the conditional use was granted based upon conditions that were not required for them to meet at the time.
Correct.
That they didn't understand, weren't required. There's a little bit of, Ken says, no, I wouldn't have required that, but when they brought me the plan, it showed it. I'm not gonna tear it apart and tell them what, you're doing too much. The assumption is that's the environment that they wanted. They thought that was the environment they were required to do, so they put it in there not knowing what the expense was. I mean, to me, we've got three options. We can remove it and just say, you don't have to do it. We can put a waiver right to protest, or we can put a time frame in there. And I don't know, I mean, I look and go, when Jensen Avenue goes in and the rest goes in, maybe it all should go in, because you do say, at what point do we pull the trigger on the waiver? The other side of the road is already done, So now we're waiting for Wiseman's to do theirs, which probably not going to happen. So at what point, at 50%, do you pull the trigger? 51%? Once Jensen is done down there, me personally, I'm okay saying, I understand you're in there, but when Jensen Avenue goes in, you have a waiver of right until Jensen Avenue goes in, and then it needs to go in on both sides of the road.
I have a hard time believing that before they purchased that, they obviously must have done a little legwork to realize what landscaping was going to cost them.
No, you should have been here. They didn't. What happened when they came here, it was a really fast one that was put together because the property that they were renting was sold. So they actually had a purchase agreement, not realizing that they were a conditional use. So it first came to us, and we turned it down because as it was explained to us, it was more of a place where people were staying on a regular basis. We turned it down. It came back before us with a different sales pitch, that it's more of a clinical environment and a counseling environment with supervision and very little overnight staying, and that's actually how it is. So it was a hot potato when it came to us, and there was a lot of things going on. They're working with a different board, their own board. So what do you think?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Part of the problem is this all drains to this little trough and then drains this way. So when Jensen comes in, if that elevation curve and everything changes, it's not like they're just gonna go down here, saw cut this out, plant some grass. They have to tear up this entire area here to make it rework, and that's kind of what happened to be the problem. And now we can't even tell them what the elevation of the street's gonna be for them to try to work up to it in the meantime.
It's like it was a pretty steep drop. It's a 4-foot drop or something like that in there.
So then what we're looking at is if you require them to put it in now and spend all that money, and then we do the road a couple years down the road, they might have to change it all, pay the money again. I don't think that's right either.
Oh, I could live with a waiver right to protest if they put in both sides of it when Jensen Avenue is done.
I think that's fair because we're at 50% on the other side of the street. At what point, we get these waivers signed, but who's the bad guy that has to pull the waivers? And, then it's another public hearing. In this case, we can say, 50%'s already done. You're doing it. Now we're at 75% of the 2-block area. Sooner or later we have a vision of what it should look like, and to me too, it's fair to the neighborhood. Everybody else has got curb and gutter and it has a look to it, and they've spent good money in there, so we just want everything to come up to standard sooner or later. And in this case, it can be later. We don't even know how much later.
Yeah, give them time to budget for it.
Fair enough. Anyone else speak on behalf before I close the public hearing? Or I actually didn't, I didn't open a public hearing, it's just under old business. So how do we want to handle it if we, I mean, we're still gonna need a vote.
Still need a vote. It'll just be the record.
So we need a motion and a second as to what we want to vote on. Do you want to make a motion, John?
I'll make a motion that we allow them a waiver right to protest. And when Jensen Avenue is completed, they'll have to put in their curb sidewalk boulevard on Jensen Avenue and on 8th Street.
A motion by Mr. Stonebarger, second by Mr. Daly. Any further discussion? I think it's fair, and then it also gets that little section of our community up to code. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Need a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Daly. Not yet. That's the next meeting. No, not yet. Second, do I have a second? Second by Mr. McGuire. All in favor, say aye. Motion carries. Now, sign code Board of Appeals. Is he? But he's on the sign code Board of Adjustment.
He is, but being a signed business owner, I think he's at that stand.
Okay. Okay, with that, I'll open up the Watertown Sign Code Board of Appeals for Wednesday, April 8th, 2015. Roll call, please. Hey, Mark, you can sit right up here and be part of the discussion too. And just accuse yourself of voting.
Stein,
Say present.
Stonebarger,
Here.
Shriver,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
McGuire,
Here.
Dolly. Here. Arnold is absent.
Thank
Will
you.
we have a quorum?
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from November 5th, 2014.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Stonebarger. Second by Mrs. Johnson. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Second item on the agenda, State Farm, Kathy Woody Holmes, sign permit 1396 appeals, the requirement sign code ordinance located at 924 4th Street Southeast. And on this one, I'll make a note, Mr. Stein is going to recuse himself because he is in the sign business. He will be available for the discussion. He just can't vote.
Okay, Thomas and Kathleen Holmes made an application because the state is acquiring additional right-of-way on this property for the reconstruction of a revamp of Highway 81. So the sign that they have there is, will be in the public right-of-way and must be moved. And the way our sign ordinance is worded now, that sign's actually an illegal or a non-conforming sign because it's a multi-pole structure. New ones must be single pole. Additionally, this business is in an R3 zoned piece of property, and no signage is allowed in the residential zone. And freestanding signs there is a very little signage allowed, I should say, in residential zone, and freestanding signs are completely prohibited. So, all public notices were met. We heard nothing back, from anybody one way or the other. And I guess we've kind of touched on the reasons why we're here. If you have any questions, Tom.
So,
Holmes
Tim,
is
this
here.
is an R3, not C3?
Yeah, that's correct.
Allowable use?
Not really. It's a pre-existing building that was built as, it was Nichols Flowers originally is what this building was built for. So it was always been used as retail / office type. When these guys bought it, they turned it into an office building, but before that it was retail sales. And I think Expressions was even there when you guys purchased the business, if I recall. But it's never been used for anything other than what it is presently.
But in R3, a specific use office building is a conditional use in there. This qualify for that? It wouldn't with the tanning salon in there.
Even the vet clinic north of there is still R3?
Yes, yep. The only, if you go north, the Old Memorial Hospital is actually zone C1, and the reason why is because it has
Zero
split.
lot lines.
There's living and, there's residential and commercial activity in that place, and I believe that's why it's zone C1.
Well, we did that a few years back to get them out of the situation, yeah.
You know, we came back on that specific use office building from the corner up there at 14th and 81. We came as far south as we could. I wonder why we didn't, I suppose there's residential buildings in here. We didn't want to bring specific use this far down?
Well, the specific use office building already relates to the corridors in this area, but I'm not so sure if
That we don't have a provision in our sign ordinance for specific use office buildings for signage. Therefore, it's pretty clear in our ordinance, we have an institutional provision which deals with clinics, hospitals, schools, churches, things like that are allowed signage, and they have their own column in here. But it doesn't really say anything for signage.
I was more concerned on the zoning of it. If it burns
Sure.
down, they can't build it.
Yeah,
It's a non-compliant building. Every building permit they need, they gotta come before the Board of Adjustment?
is that correct, Ken?
except for an interior remodel, they don't.
Okay.
But if they're gonna change the outside, they would.
I believe that is, I think that's all. Come on, baby. Come on. Well, we also have, you know, as this gets done, there's those specific use office buildings to the north of this property that you're referring to, we have a few of them. There's already one for sure I've gotten a question on with Preventive Dental Arts that they need to move their sign because it's in the right of way. So we might have more of this issue up.
That was, that's probably another discussion on that. On this one, it's the signage. It needs to be moved
Right.
because it's in the right of way. I can't ask you whether it's compliant or not because you can't have signs in the R3.
Yeah. That's C3, Blake.
Okay. If it were C3, it's a compliant sign, correct, as far as square footage
Correct. Yep.
and height?
Yep.
My
And-
question on this, as far as compliant sign though, was it looks like it's still gonna overhang where the public right-of-way is being
Oh,
expanded.
they'll ensure that it moves back. I think
Far enough,
the
okay.
elevation view they show you probably isn't maybe exactly right, but
Okay.
it will be placed, so it will not infringe on that.
And behind it, there's a second sign,
That's that's actually a
Temporary?
banner.
banner.
So just for our sake, give us the 101 on banners again.
Banners are excluded from sign permit and excluded from us really counting them as long as they're compliantly put together. This one's on a post, cemented in the ground, minimum of 2 feet in the ground like it is. Or they can be attached to the building. That's your two options on them.
And a maximum size of 24 square feet.
24 square foot maximum size, which that's all, this.
It was kind of an odd thing how we did banners, and we call them banners because they're not permanent, but we make them permanently, put them in the ground. But we don't call them a sign, we call them a banner. Perfect.
It doesn't,
Gotta love the political side.
it's excluded. They're exempt is what, they're under exempt in the sign ordinance.
But the current sign as it stands is not compliant, and they are going to put in a compliant sign. If it was
If
in-
it was in the proper zoning,
Zoning,
correct,
you're right.
yes, yep.
Okay.
It's built to the standard that's in our sign ordinance.
All right, let's get back to the sign part of it. You know, I think if I remember on this, what we did is we went back from there and we tried to fit everything into the ordinances with specific use offices we could, but there were some places that had occupancies that weren't part of a specific use. Tanning salons, haircutting places, vet clinics, and we skipped all of those. And just from a compliance issue is why I asked that question for the applicant's protection.
The institutional column within our thing here, which says, this column does not represent a zoning district. It applies to institutional and certain residential uses permitted in residential districts, such as hospital, clinics, churches, schools, government buildings, libraries, museums, apartment complexes, retirement homes, or anything, or when it says,
are
certain
you in
residential
you in
uses
sign or
permitted in
zoning?
residential district. Within that portion, then there is a provision here for them to have certain signs.
Right, right.
So,
So
Yeah.
would I guess a good question maybe in this thing is, do we consider a specific use office building under the residential uses portion in a residential district? So we could use that for anything that qualifies as a,
We'd
this
have,
wouldn't qualify.
I'd
because
want to
it has
look
to
into
stay.
that a little clear before I
Okay.
say yes or no on that. We got to go back. That specific uses office building's pretty tenuous up north. We don't want to make too many changes accidentally.
But this wouldn't comply anyways from what you're saying because of the hair and.
Right,
and
right,
so on.
because one of the occupants doesn't, it's, but, come on up front and state your name.
I don't know if this, I don't know if this carries any water, but it's no longer a tanning zone. Tanning.
What is it?
Hairdresser.
Still doesn't qualify.
Okay.
So, what
State your name. Tom Holmes.
What happens is the specific use office was designed for further up where we infringed in the neighborhoods where we don't have any buffers, and it's attorneys, mortuaries, I think, or, basically what was up there.
Mhm.
I would say more non-retail is kind of what it was. We've had people come to us and say they wanted to put a hair salon up there, and that was shot down, but the questions we had were more on zoning as to why it's not zoned properly. But let's get back to the sign. So they want to slide the sign over. It's not going to infringe on the right of way. It's a better looking sign than it currently is. It meets everything in the code that we think it should meet if
Yep.
it were
If it was
if
zoned
it were
properly.
to be rezoned into something else where we think it would be rezoned in, it would be a compliant sign. That was my main concern.
Correct, yep.
Okay.
And the other part of the application you can see in there is they're just changing the face on that one wall cabinet. That's not even a new sign, it's just a different face, so.
Luke, you have a question?
Yeah, I've got to say it. So we're clear, we need to be certain whether or not the use of having a sign is an allowable use in this particular district, because if it is not, that is not something you can variance, that's a use variance at that point. And I guess I should defer to legal counsel on that question, but if it is a use variance, that's a no-no.
So what you're saying is we need to make sure it's an allowable use to have a sign before we can variance. So we can't variance something that's not
Exactly.
legal.
If it's not allowed in that district, it's not allowed in any location. It doesn't matter if you variance it.
And Tim, the variance is for what?
To have it, I mean.
To have it.
To have it at all.
So really, you looked through the ordinance and said, hey, there's a sign there, but it's a non-compliant
It's legal
sign.
non-conforming.
So I can't issue a permit because you're not supposed to have a sign there to start with.
Mhm. Yep.
And at this point, we look to our legal attorney and ask him, because we can't act on something we don't have authority to act on. Fair enough?
Fair.
I'm struggling with whether or not it, as a use within that zoning district, a sign would not be allowable. When you look at the conditional uses that are allowed, we've got clubs, lodges, community centers, clinics, hospitals, and all those uses, if they're in an R3 zone, have signs.
Mhm. Correct.
So I think we can, because it's a component part of the use. It's not a use independent of the primary use of the property, which, using the example of a clinic and a hospital, to me, the sign is a component part of it. It's not its own use.
So what you're saying is that if, going along the line that it's not a use, that would mean everything at Prairie Lakes and every church in town has got a sign that they don't have a use, that shouldn't be there.
That's my point, is that we clearly allow them, so I think that the position the city's probably taken is to, not to disagree with Luke, but I think it's probably just to tag along with what he said. I think that the sign should be considered a component part of it, that why would you put a clinic or a hospital there if you couldn't put a sign?
That it's accessory to the use that's there.
That's exactly, yep, I agree.
So we'll go along with that it's an accessory to the use that exists. Any further questions?
I have a question, Pat. Last week when we talked at the Planning Commission about the signs on North 81, the consistency of them being the lower sign, instead of the high billboard sign. I'm just,
What she's getting at is in our meeting last week, when Luke showed pictures of the signage that goes up and down there, all the signs to this point were low, I would say, what would you say, a low standing monument sign? And to what point on this stretch, do we allow taller signs? And we really don't address that anywhere in the code. There's nothing in that specific use office building zoning or any of those zonings that dictate the size of the sign. It just so happens that all of those signs are smaller, it just, you know,
If
unnoticeable
If
signs.
we were to use the institutional provision that's my guideline that I use for a specific use, let's say, and this is a 65-foot frontage, so they would be allowed 1 square foot for every 2 lineal feet. So they would be allowed a 37.5 square foot sign is all they would be allowed to have if we went by the institutional provision.
And the funeral homes and the eye clinics and things up there, they could put taller signs up if they wanted to by code. They just
are
choose not to?
allowed up to 20 feet high underneath the
Yeah.
institutional provision.
And Luke, I think what you were trying to show us was what that buffer area could look like. It does look like, but it's not
Yeah.
that they have to look like that.
I think that's the other point that we did mention was that it was kind of a case of, gosh, take a look at this. It's happened without us regulating it, basically. So you don't have that regulation requiring that. It's just, that's what the character's been, as you go up that way. So there's really nothing in your ordinance that would specify that they have to do it, aside from the disagreement I had earlier. But that's, yeah, from the standpoint of requiring the monument sign to be lower, there's nothing that you would have in your ordinance to say that.
And and that's fine. I just would,
Yeah.
have they thought of that? Have they thought of being consistent with what's up the rest of North 81?
I think maybe in this case, the higher sign would be better because of access out onto highway. If you put a monument out there, you'd have a hard time seeing around that sign. You know, this
Well,
thing.
you have the banner.
Yeah, and that banner might end up having to move actually because it might actually encroach on that right away also. And that's the other question, are they, is a banner allowed if they're, you know, it doesn't really say it, just says banners are allowed on businesses and it's a business, so. I don't think there's that banner's gonna stay or be moved and still be there. Yeah, it's allowed to be there, yeah. Cause it's a business, you're allowed to have one. You said it might have to move, correct? But it doesn't have to, no?
If they gotta move it, I'll move it.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, any other questions before I close the open? With that, I'll close the public hearing. Ask for a motion and a second for discussion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Mr. Dolly,
I'll second.
second by Mr. Stonebarger. Any further discussion?
I do have a question, and if they ever, let's say a different tenant comes into the expressions area and they want to put a sign up, they come back on the building.
You know, the next thing I'm gonna say when this is closed is we have to look at the sign code ordinance, because when we look at our flow chart, it says no signs in the R3. That has to change, because we have clinics and hospitals and funeral homes in the R3.
Institutional section of the sign code is what allows those to go into
Okay.
residential areas. It is covered already, believe it or not,
So,
under your
so
sign
what
code.
you're saying, where our issue is with that is that retail isn't, there's certain things that are in the R3 that aren't, that have signs that we.
Well, and actually an insurance agent is allowed to be as
Specific use.
specific use office building is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so I mean, if that were to be rezoned as a specific use office building, if it qualified, they would be allowed signage.
Correct.
Okay,
In the R3.
in the R3. So,
That's if you want me to use the institutional for all specific use office buildings. Right now, that's not necessarily the case.
no, our code says what specific use office buildings can have.
For signage, we use institutional provision as the signage. Okay.
So far.
The specific use office doesn't have another subsection.
We'll dial that in. That's kind of off to the side. I have a motion and a second to approve. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. No other data or no other information? No old business, no new business?
No, I wanted to touch on the institutional thing and how we apply it, but that's probably a discussion for another day. Yeah.
Yeah, have
Yeah,
the staff
nothing
discuss it
else.
and then
Yeah.
let us know. All right, I need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mrs. Johnson, second by Mr. McGuire. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, motion carries.